Hello. So I am continuing my little series on post-Platonic propositions, which is exploring post-nominalist Neo-Platonism, which is I got from John Vervaeke. In a propositional manner, meaning actually talking about the things. And if you want more context, please take a look at the episode 1, and this is episode 2. But just as a quick review, episode 1 was mostly about phenomenology, was about our ability to understand things as individuals. And I emphasized all models are wrong, some are useful, meaning we have to use, as human beings, we have to use models in order to operate in the world, and they all have their problems, but we have to use them, and we do and should try to use those which are most useful. To this episode, I am actually going to be focusing more on the idea that an individual human being is not a viable living organism. We cannot do things by ourselves. And to understand that, we are going to talk a lot about economics. Now, to understand the field of economics, I highly recommend the work of Thomas Sowell. He actually does not enforce his copyrights on the audio version of his books. So they are available on YouTube for free. And you can buy the physical books if you like. And being the economist that he is, he figured out that actually giving away the digital versions ends up selling more books in total and being better for him. So he does that, and so he's his work is available that way. His book, Basic Economics, is a textbook that is incredibly useful. I highly recommend it to anyone and everyone. Milton Friedman he is obviously a famous economist, and but the main reason I wanted to bring him up is because of videos he made educating people about economics that are available on YouTube. I would particularly look at his video on the pencil if you've never heard about it before, but he explains how it is basically impossible for an individual human being to create a pencil because of everything that goes into it, and how the global economy is necessary for something as simple as a pencil to cheaply get to you. This is something a lot of people don't understand, and actually is an underlying problem of a lot of both globalist and anti-globalist understandings of economics. People who make the mistake of thinking that we could somehow individually, and I hate this word, subsistence farm, and lead any sort of, I mean, it's such a silly model that it's like a caricature of itself. Basically, there are a lot of people who have this supposed individualist idea that I'll be a survivor and I'll survive by myself or with a small group of people. And it's like, yeah, it's just so silly. An individual human being is not a viable living organism. Just imagine not using anything metal. Then imagine trying to mine metals, much less smelt them and form them, right? No survivalist whatsoever would ever consider not at least having a pocket knife with them, right? Imagine the world, the difference in your life with a knife and without a knife, right? If you were trying to live without anything metal whatsoever, it's and then imagine trying to include mining metal in your subsistence farming, or so that's automatically crazy and out there. What unfortunately as a reaction, intelligent people have is, oh, globalism, right? We have to have this homogenous global culture, and it's like, no, we don't. Both these models are silly and wrong. Unfortunately, what's wrong with the globalist model is harder to explain than what's wrong with the individualist model. But Milton Friedman's, I would, if you have not seen his, it's like 2-minute video on the pencil, I would definitely look at it. Friedrich Hayek is a favorite of kind of the libertarian, what's called the Austrian School of Economics. He was an absolute genius. He explained a lot of things very well, including why communism would never work. Socialism just cannot work. And I would say that he is an updated version of Adam Smith. I don't recommend, I see no reason to actually read Adam Smith himself, The Wealth of Nations, but Adam Smith is the granddaddy of economics. And then we have to mention Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. A lot of people would not include Engels at all. I personally cannot go along with attributing Marxism to Karl Marx, because the man would have been a complete failure without Friedrich Engels, who is actually the person who behind Marxism and its success. Karl Marx was a failure as a human being in every way. But that's a whole other thing. And their ideas were a failure in every way. They had criticisms of capitalism and a very poor understanding of the world, and what happened was that eventually their this is kind of blurry. Let me try to fix this a bit so that I am not so blurry to you guys. Hopefully that's better. That's a little bit better. Okay. So, I mean, Marx and Engels, absolute failures, and the only reason we need to talk about them and study them and pay them any heed is the fact that so many people are still caught up in their ideas and their bad ideas, and frankly, it's best to know what types of things they were talking about so you can understand when someone is saying stupid things. I mean, that's the best I can put it. Like, if you can identify that someone is using Marxist ideas, that will help you filter out the noise of someone who is basically worthless in your distributed cognition. Okay. Now, in order to understand how people think about things, we have to situate them within the world, and that comes from a having some sort of origin narrative, some sort of cosmology, some understanding of what the world is like. And as I keep on trying to explain to people, all models are wrong, some are useful. Everyone has a model, and most of us, well, I wouldn't say most of us, but most people are not even aware that they are using a model to look at the world, because it is the model that was given to them as they were growing up, when they were learning the language. There are all kinds of things that are implicit in what we know and what's included in our distributed cognition, in what other people help us understand. A lot of this is mimetic, both memetic, as in it spreads from person to person, and mimetic as in miming, as in copying those who are around us. And what happens when people become red-pilled is they recognize that their distributed cognition, those things which they took for granted, are doing them wrong. Their things aren't how they imagined them to be. They become distrustful of their distributed cognitive network. They start becoming conspiratorial thinkers. They start withdrawing from it, which are the natural ways of dealing with a poisoned distributed cognition, like we have, and we do have, a very poisoned distributed cognition, which is why this whole project even exists. So let's look at the origin narratives that people have had and people do have. There is the biblical narrative, which is the Platonic narrative, and it is how most people, especially in the West, assume the world is, which is there was a beginning, there will be an end, there is progression. This is the Neoplatonic, biblical, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Abrahamic conception of how the world is. And for the longest time, it had to contend with the steady state view of the world, which is the world is, and the world always was, and the world will continue to be as it is. And to some extent, without the ideas in the Bible, this steady state idea, either that things repeat constantly, and it's funny, the Genesis idea became popular enough that the Big Bang pretty much was proven, and that is how we understand the world. Sir Roger Penrose, who is one of the preeminent cosmologists and probably the official cosmologist of this little corner of the internet, I would say, actually has a sort of repeating cycle now for the Big Bang, which you can go into yourself. But these basically were the competing scientific understandings of our narrative, either Genesis, or that things always were, or are cyclical, and there's no actual narrative to the world. And that these two competing ideas affect how you view your relationship with other people, whether you believe that there is such a thing as progress, that you want God's kingdom to actually manifest itself, or you don't. And people who are materialists tend to have either some sort of Genesis or steady state view, which they don't necessarily understand themselves. And I would say that the Rousseauian view, which has infected Western understanding, is a combination of these two, which thinks of itself as being scientific, and at the time of Rousseau may have even made the claim that it was the best of our scientific knowledge, which was that primitive man was in a utopian state, and that was corrupted by civilization and humanity itself, and that if we can somehow remove the pollutants, we will go back to this utopian state. And this Rousseauian view infects much of how the non-Bible based understanding of the world is. If you want to better understand these narratives and how they affect your morality, Jonathan Haidt has actually several lectures available on YouTube about two different views of the world. He created a video which is interesting, which tells these stories from the left and the right, and really the narrative that we use on the right tends to be Genesis and things getting progressively better, as opposed to on the left, people tend to use this Rousseauian view, which is things were perfect and idyllic, and then horrible things came to be. And if we get rid of the horrible things, we get rid of our chains in Rousseauian language, then we will be free again. Now, of course, there is also an attempt at materialism, which is through anthropology, through actually the scientific method, which controverts what Rousseau said, but it has all sorts of problems, which in this corner of the internet we talk about a lot, which is, where are you standing from? Where are you getting your base analysis? And what has become evident is actually the scientific anthropological model has to be on a substrate of actual religious value systems. And that's how we arrive at people like Jordan Peterson, and a look back towards Neoplatonism, but a post-Platonic Neoplatonism. I hope all of that was kind of clear. If you have questions, please let me know. And if there are ideas in this presentation which you find useful, if you are at all able to present them better than I can, which should not be hard to do, please do so. Have conversations about these things and make your own presentations, or you can join my Discord server and try to help me improve on these things. Hopefully they will be at least a little bit better than I am making them now. Okay, so based on these narratives, we come upon various ways of describing the source of our morality. Now, I have to say, this is obviously not at all an exclusive. This is not in any way an exclusive list, a comprehensive list, but it talks about a lot of the most important ideas, which are morality comes from a divine source, right? Comes from the Bible, comes from God. Thou shalt not steal. We're going to be talking a lot about property. We're going to be talking about property rights and economics and value. And for a lot of people, the answer to where does all of this come from is, in fact, that it is from the Bible. The Bible is true, or some religion is true, and that there is a divine source of revelation which lets us know what is proper morality. An alternative view, a view that tries to be more scientific, is positivism. Yes, I am in fact experimenting with various forms of lockdown, chat lockdown. I think the must subscribe to chat model is actually really good. So positivism, so positive as opposed to normative, means what is, right? So a positive statement would be, I have a pen in my hand. A normative statement would be, I should put the pen down, right? And there is an idea that morality can be discovered in a positivist manner. This doesn't work. At best, you end up with things like social Darwinism, which and communism and fascism and all the horrible things of the 20th century. But there are people like Sam Harris, I would say, although I'm sure he would deny it, that kind of have this idea that you can discover what morality is, and it exists. It's not necessarily of a divine nature, but it does exist, and we can discover it through some method. The fact is that ultimately, people don't use either of these really. They actually use what Jonathan Haidt has been talking about, which is their intuition. What feels right, what seems right to them ultimately becomes their source of morality. And this is what ends up kind of upending how we've viewed morality until now. There was a concept, especially in modernity, that we can have a pragmatic morality. And I think to some extent, again, you can say that the neo-atheist types try to do it that way. Human thriving, minimal suffering, all kinds of things like that. But ultimately, the postmodernist critique that we end up with what they call power knowledge dictating what is morality is, in a sense, true. I mean, you don't have too much of a choice between power knowledge and divine revelation. And this is something that a lot of people will chafe at and disagree with me on. But I think a serious look at the sources of morality sees that you are, in fact, required to choose either that there is a divine giver of morality, or you have to kind of succumb to what I would say is the nihilistic idea of power knowledge, which is whatever people think is the source of morality is in fact the source of morality. We're going to try to take this into more concrete, actual concrete examples and understanding how economics ultimately comes back to these things. But I wanted to give you the background so that when we go through economics, it will be easier to understand what I'm getting at back to where we are as post-nominalist Neoplatonists, hopefully. Okay, so let's talk about property. Let's talk about this pen if you want, right? Does this pen belong to me? Does this pen belong to me? This particular pen. I'm guessing you're assuming that it does. And it does. But why does it belong to me? I could be borrowing it from someone else. I could have stolen it from someone else. Well, what does that mean for me to steal it, right? What is the source of ownership for this pen? I own this pen. Why do I own this pen? Answer that really for yourself, right? So there are various ideas about why exactly I would own this pen. And the simplest one is brute force. Possession is 9/10 of the law. I have it. It's my pen. And if you can take it away from me, then it's your pen. And if you can't take it away from me, then it's my pen. But is that right? And should we as a society, right? If I see two people fighting over a pen, is it right that brute force determines who owns the pen? And most of us would say no, that it is possible to steal things from other people. And so we start looking at other sources, and a lot of people would say, "Thou shalt not steal." That's what tells me what is a pen, right? Who owns this pen? The status of this pen is determined ultimately by God saying, "Thou shalt not steal." That gets into a lot of problems. And that's why there is Jewish law, which goes in heavy detail, right? So actually, large amounts of Jewish law is not about holiness necessarily, but also about, okay, so who actually owns a pen? When is it right for me to give this back to someone else? When someone claims this, right? And we could go into that whole thing of divine code, but obviously in a Christian nation, in a secular nation, but really a Christian nation, we've decided that canon law and divine code can't be the real source of it. And then, so you have a lot of questions of a sovereign state. A king determines, a government determines what is ownership, what is right. And the idea of a social contract, right? That this pen belongs to me, because if you were to come take my pen, I could call the police. Hopefully it would be a much more expensive pen, but you understand the basic idea, right? And the problem with that is it goes back to, okay, but how does that sovereign, you're pushing off the question onto somebody else, but then how should the sovereign state determine who owns this pen? And this actually is a whole field which we get into, right? And questions become, is possession 9/10 of the law? Should we be basing this on a divine code? And ultimately, it's actually just a cheat to the idea of the state is really a cheat to go back to the other two. And so people will start talking about natural rights. And this has kind of been the secular understanding, modernist understanding, American understanding of what says what is right and wrong. But natural rights and nature's God ultimately either goes back to a normative divine code which describes the world not as it is, or a positive, mostly brute force, that it is as it is and it should be as it is, which doesn't, also is unsatisfying and doesn't work. And this is why we end up going back to power knowledge. I remember when I was in law school, my contracts professor, and this is the one thing I learned in all of law school, told us, you don't write contracts because they are enforceable. You write contracts because people think they are enforceable. And the fact is, for possession, mostly what people think is right is what ends up being right. And while we may find that unsatisfying, this is why the postmodernist critique is so influential in the law, because we, in essence, are saying no, divine law won't work, and we are also in essence saying, well, we don't want to leave things as brute force or positivist, or even whether you or not you want to do pragmatic, but ultimately it appears like we're just talking about power knowledge, systems that are training people to think in a sort of false consciousness. And all of this goes back to Marx. And I hope it becomes clear how your origin narrative, how you believe the world and cosmology to exist, affects all of this in a very real sense. So let's talk about real estate. Again, who owns a house? Who owns a piece of land? Well, mostly in our laws, we say that whoever has title to the land. Well, how'd you get title to the land? And what allows you to gain title to that land and keep title to that land? If I'm in Hawaii and somebody got there before me and decided to fence off a lot of the beach, who decides if that person is right to exclude me from that beach? And legally, we basically say that it is rights granted, a title granted by the sovereign government, right? Which again takes you back to power knowledge. There is the idea of the homestead, which is the person who improves that piece of land. The person who works that piece of land should have title to that land, right? The person who's been there, the person who's, it's it's theirs, right? And anybody coming onto it, somebody who's born, and this gets into a whole question of blood and soil, and it's not, these are not easy questions. And practically, you have to decide, how are you going to say this land belongs to these people and not to other people? And of course, this has been the fight of the cause of many wars, and continues to be the problem of the problem of so Chad the alcoholic showed up. He said, looking forward to learning to this whole video. And since I want to be Chad the alcoholic when I grow up, I always include his comments in my videos. Go check out the Meaning Hub channel when you get a chance. And we end up with something which a lot of people will be really surprised about. It's kind of like eminent domain, but it's actually been a part of our legal system for certainly as long as British common law has existed, which is adverse possession. Yeah, it's my land, I'm here, but I'm not using it as well as I should, as I could, as other people would. And what makes that person who has laid claim to, especially if it's large amounts of land, think that we should let them keep it? And so in actual law, and you can look up adverse possession and figure it out. And today we've started, because adverse possession doesn't work because people find it so surprising, we've in fact started using eminent domain in order to achieve the goals of adverse possession. And this is causing a lot of people to be red-pilled and to understand, hold on, there's something going on here that I don't like, that I might not necessarily understand, and my cognitive network has not made me capable of understanding. And so it's what we should do economically in people's rights. At some point, you're not going to be able to defend rights against people who simply see you being very wealthy and start to use brute force, and there becomes a majoritarian impulse, Marie Antoinette, and a violent reaction, which Mark Blythe, I think his last name is Blythe. It's been a long time since I listened to him. He's an economist from Brown University, not Glenn Lowry. This is a Scottish guy. One of the things he says is the Hamptons is not a defensible position, and it's not. And so we get back to, again, power knowledge. What people think is fine and okay, what people are willing to accept as title to that land, right? When people actually listen to that no trespassing sign, or you have enough security guards and enough police to enforce that no trespassing sign. But at what point do you end up with the type of standoff where you have rich people in front of a mansion with their guns, and a mob of people outside saying, no, I want Marxism, or I want, right? And so you end up again with power knowledge. And that's why Game of Thrones is so vital to our culture right now, I believe. If you have not watched the series, or even if you have, I will go through the riddle that I think actually tells you what the theme of that entire series is, and I think what makes it so interesting. And I might be butchering this, but Varys asks this riddle of, there's a king, a rich man, and a priest, and a lone swordsman. And each of them commands the swordsman to kill the two others. Who does that swordsman obey? Does he obey his king? Does he obey the rich man who will reward him? Does he obey the priest? Well, it depends on that swordsman. And this is why power knowledge is power, right? Why the framework that we have as people, that deeper level, is actually what controls everything else. And guess what? What my law professor said, in fact, is very true. Because if I can convince you that it is right for me to have this land, to live in that house, that's all that actually matters. And there are a lot of people in the world who actually believe, okay, this is how the world is, and the best thing I can do is convince people that I get to live in the mansions, and convince other people that they should be out subsistence farming somewhere else, that they should give up, that they should go hide from the rest of the world until I either overpower them or Matt Pat's morality. I guess you're saying materialist, patriotic morality. Not sure, but it is precisely the people who understand that power knowledge is, in fact, what gets you whatever you want, that are, I believe, driving the supposed right wing and certainly the far right into this belief that, oh, you know what? I'm just going to cut myself off from society. I'm going to go and be a subsistence farmer. I am going to, in fact, disarm myself completely and leave all the actual levers of power, everything that is important to the clown world, right? And there's an actual smart, intelligent group behind that clown face. And they are, in fact, willing to see the world burn so that they can be kings of the ashes. So where does that leave us? People who don't think, who understand the power of power knowledge, people who are a post-nominalist Neo-Platonists. We have to come up with something which, with theories of ownership, morality, our narrative, where we are, who we are, what is right, which allows us to function in a world where these two propositions are obviously right. And I think that any of us in this corner of the internet should be willing to agree. All models are wrong. Some are useful. An individual human being is not a viable living organism. And together, as a group, we can actually formulate that post-nominalist Neoplatonism that brings everything together that John Vervaeke advocates for. So, things to consider. Reality asserts itself. This idea that the postmodernists have that things can just are whatever power knowledge dictates, it doesn't work. It does not work. Reality does assert itself. Reality doesn't care what you think, what your model is, and some models are more useful than others. Some models do work and others do not. The one refers to at least Spinoza's God. And Spinoza's God really is the minimal God that this corner of the internet has been asserting, and I'm fine with asserting it because it's much better than the postmodernist conception. And that's why we are arriving at Neoplatonism, is that we necessarily, in order to function, must believe that the world is in fact in some way coherent, that it works together, and that we can live through it that way. That is God one. That is the Arenic God. That is God as being. Then there's Revelation. And Revelation says, no, actually, there really is a God. It's not sufficient to go with the Arenic God. It's not sufficient to be content with Spinoza's God. That there is an actual God that who reveals himself, and that is my position. It's not the minimal position. It's not the what every Neoplatonist has to believe, but ultimately, in order for Neoplatonism to work, I believe that it has to, in fact, be embodied in an idea of revelation. And that's what I would advocate for. And then there is the possibility that we can, in fact, innovate. And many people, especially creative people, don't want to be locked into all of the things that I've been talking about. And that, I think, is part of the reason why we end up with so many people, especially on the left, willing to flirt with utopianism and Marxism and things, and absurd, I would say, attempts to reconfigure the world. And I would submit personally that even if you want to innovate, you should in fact try to innovate incrementally and in pieces. Because if you're actually paying attention to the whole picture, you realize we are tiny. Each of us is tiny, and no individual human being has the capacity to understand everything and innovate in a completely de novo. There are boundaries to your innovation. Okay, now let's talk about economic concepts, which I think are necessary if we are in fact going to be talking and thinking about these things. Wealth, value, public goods, and anti-rivalrous goods. Let's start with wealth. So, this pen is wealth. An apple is wealth. If I have an apple, I am wealthier than someone who doesn't have an apple, usually. We'll talk more about stuff like that. But a lot of people have a basic assumption that wealth is static. You can only take wealth, move it, change it. It doesn't grow, it doesn't shrink. This is the zero-sum game is the first problem that people who should be excluded from this conversation completely have. Wealth is created, consumed, and destroyed as well. And transferring wealth can actually change the value of wealth. So let's talk about an apple tree. An apple tree creates apples. Some people will take care of their apple tree, and some people will let their apple tree die. Some people will take the apples from the apple tree. Some people will let all those apples fall to the ground and rot away. Some people would chop down the apple tree in order to use the wood. Wealth can be created, wealth can be transferred, it can be consumed, and it can just be destroyed. If I destroy wealth, one person's wealth, that doesn't mean somebody else is going to get wealthier, right? And we have a comparative, right? We view ourselves in comparison to other people, right? But the only way to actually make everyone equal is to destroy all the wealth. And we don't want to do that. In fact, we want to create wealth. We want to create lots of wealth. We want And that's what capitalism has, in fact, allowed us to do. But the problem of wealth is actually the problem of valuation. How do you value wealth? What is this pen worth? And how does that worth compare to anything else like that? Do I call it a painting? She didn't use paint, I don't think. But that piece of art. How do these two things compare to each other? And that's what we call value. And most economists will tell you that, and certainly the Austrian economists and most of the economists we have on the right, unfortunately, will tell you that there is only one theory of value that works. There's only one theory of value that we can use, and that's the price theory of value. The price theory of value says that the value of anything is what it can get in what its price is in a theoretical perfect market. I can buy this pen certainly for $1. It's less than $1. I can't buy that painting for $1. So that painting, that art, is worth more than this pen. And if comparatively, right, the only way that we can actually compare things would be the price of them theoretically. And that just doesn't work in so many ways that obviously people rebel against it. And we end up with a lot of agnosticism. You can't put a price on things. You can't put a price on life. You can't, some people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And that agnosticism, similarly, it doesn't function. And unfortunately, we have to deal with the labor theory of value, which is obviously wrong and stupid, but it's the Marxist idea, so people will bring it up. And it's this egalitarian idea that the worth of something is how much one individual person values it, how much the work they put into it. Some democratic idea of like, we can set things in a, with Soviets, it's completely unworkable, and it's why Marxism is absolutely bankrupt. But that's another attempt at a theory of value. And I think part of what we've been talking about in our corner of the internet is a meaning theory of value. To some extent, you might want to look at the work of Noah Yuval Harari. I don't recommend it, but he apparently does discuss these ideas, because we as a society are in fact trying to assign value to wealth in a way that helps us create more wealth, that gives an equitable, a just distribution of wealth, and something we can live with that's beyond just power knowledge. And that's, I think, where during their debates, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris were talking about, I think they gave an example of a glass of water, right? And idea was that, okay, this glass of water, if it has sentimental value, right? A guitar is worth one thing, and Elvis's first guitar is worth something else. And where is that value? What is that value? How do you assign value to that? And unfortunately, all economics can do is, in fact, assign price to it. And there are people on the right who want to, in fact, try to make the price theory of value everything. And that is part of the backlash that I think especially you saw when Tucker Carlson was on Ben Shapiro's show a long time ago, and they had a basic clash. And this is where the conservatives versus the libertarians are in fact clashing, and where I think we need to, in fact, get rid of the Austrian School of Economics, because it is useful to the people who believe that it's all power knowledge anyway, because it's obviously wrong, and people should be able to understand that this is a wrong model. It is a flawed model, but it's a useful model. Okay. Concepts of wealth that are important. Some goods are capital goods. An apple tree creates apples. It's not just a good, it's a capital good. It's something that helps create more wealth. And it's a much bigger problem when the wrong person has capital, and that's especially true of capital like real estate, and why we have adverse possession and eminent domain, because you can't just allow people to let their capital stagnate, or worse, deteriorate. Because if someone destroys capital, that makes our entire society much poorer. And in fact, your use of your goods can be detrimental to other people. And a simple assertion of rights will not work. It is not a functional model. There are consumables, consumable goods, and like cakes. And the question becomes, who gets to consume these goods? Who should get to consume goods? How much can we consume? And that's when we get into the problem of consumer society. We need to understand the concept of currency. I'm not doing any of these economic ideas justice, but these are important ideas, things we have to understand in order to significantly address the problems that we are talking about. Currency, money, is not just coupons. It's not just power knowledge. It is useful in economics, and monetary policy is real. Monetary policy actually affects things. And that's why we have all the Bitcoiners, and you can go into everything that the Bitcoiners want to talk about, but these are important things. Inflation matters. I hope it's become clear to you that inflation matters. The velocity of currency, the velocity of money, how fast money travels matters. And honestly, this is too complicated for me to even attempt a beginning idea of it, but it's something you have to understand if you are going to actually deal with this part of our distributed cognition. And if you don't understand these ideas, you need to have the intellectual humility to say, I need to outsource this part of my cognition to somebody reliable, and to find somebody reliable to actually outsource that cognition to, and then support that person in what they say. I want to talk about rivalrous and excludable goods because for somebody who understands the rest of this, and I was actually talking to somebody, I believe on Bridges of Meaning it was, who is getting his PhD in economics, obviously a smart person who knows all this stuff that I've been talking about, well, most of it at least, and understands capital and consumables and currency, and understands rivalrous and excludable goods. But I just remember we had an IDW meeting in Los Angeles, which I invited Eric Weinstein to, and he showed up at. And I was there for about an hour, and it was the exact same discussion we always have about capitalism versus Marxism. And there was a libertarian versus a socialist, and they were having all the same arguments that everyone who's actually knowledgeable about this stuff has. And Eric Weinstein came and he blew up the discussion. And I want to explain to you how he blew up the discussion, and what all of the people in our little corner of the internet who actually understand this stuff need to think about. A good is rivalrous if only one person can use it at a time. If I use it, it's somebody else either cannot use it or it diminishes their use. If I use this pen, it could get consumed rather quickly if I use it a lot, and nobody else will be able to use it. A hammer is more durable, but it's still rivalrous because either I use it or somebody else uses it. Multiple people can't use it at the same time. Compare that to let's start with a campground. If it's large enough and there are few enough people, ultimately, for most of our history, these ideas have been theoretical and not real. And our economic systems had trouble dealing with non-rivalrous, non-excludable goods. So a campground, if it's large enough, right? A lake, if it's large enough, it's not really rivalrous. Everybody can use the lake, right? Everybody can go swimming in the Pacific Ocean, right? Mostly, until we start talking about 8 billion people. An excludable good is something that you can keep other people from using. So, the beautiful view that I have of the mountains, that's not excludable. You can't stop me from looking at public art. And it's not rivalrous. So that makes it what we call a public good. And our society had a lot of trouble dealing with public goods. How do we actually deal with public goods? modern models fail. As our society has progressed, a lot of the older economic ideas have stopped working well. I spoke about public goods, communal property, as in everybody owns it. You can talk to our resident Hutterites like Julian about that. That has its own problems. If the community is small enough, you don't have to really think about it. But as the community gets larger and larger, you do. And so you get, especially on the right, people who are like, oh, let's chop ourselves up into into smaller communities, and we won't deal with this stuff. Unfortunately, that doesn't work, and it makes you weaker. And the people who do the opposite will, in fact, end up gaining more and more power and more capacity to overwhelm you, and you're just basically killing yourself. And the people who believe in power knowledge, I believe, are actually using that against us. Increasingly, our society is the value in our society, the production in our value in our society is intellectual property. And intellectual property is non-rivalrous. Some people want to argue that it's non-excludable. Well, we've done a pretty good job of excluding people mostly. And that is something a lot of people find problematic and wish weren't true. And it's a problem. It's a problem that people are talking about. The thing is, what too many people are not talking about, and when I was talking to that PhD in economics, he's getting his PhD in economics, he didn't know about anti-rivalrous goods because there's a thing called network externalities. Externalities are things which cause economic models to malfunction. And a network externality is when our economic model is being affected by networks. Let me give you an example. Twitter. Obviously, Elon Musk could make a new Twitter if he wanted to. There's lots of people who are trying to make new Twitters. Minds.com, or whatever, Truth Social, whatever, right? You can program it, but it will not have the value of the network. Twitter has a user base. People go on Twitter because other people are on Twitter. People go on TikTok because other people are on TikTok. There's a network externality there. And that's when you end up with something that one scholar has started calling an anti-rivalrous good. And this is what the bombshell that Eric Weinstein threw into our discussion, which is there are goods which are anti-rivalrous, meaning my use of them doesn't decrease the ability of other people to, not only doesn't decrease the ability of other people to use it, but increases the ability of other people to use it. The more I use the internet, the more I actually engage with Wikipedia, the more I contribute to Facebook and Twitter, the more I like good things and I do it well, which helps bring important ideas to the top, the more upvotes and downvotes and useful upvotes and downvotes there are in Reddit, the better it becomes. And by consuming, by using that good, I am actually improving it. I am creating wealth. And for economic systems to function, what you want to do is you want to reward people for creating wealth. And that's not what we're doing. And increasingly, more and more of our economy is becoming anti-rivalrous goods, intellectual property, meaning, and things which our economic models are not able to deal with. What do you do when 90% of your gross domestic product is anti-rivalrous goods, if not intellectual property? How do you deal with that? What kind of market signals are there? What happens to the price theory of value? Our economic models are failing completely. And as anti-rivalrous goods become larger and larger segments of our economy, the more our economic models are going to fail us completely. And that's part of what's going on. And we have to consider that if we are going to be at the cutting edge of human knowledge and ideas. Hopefully that was important propositional knowledge for you to consider. Hopefully you found that edifying. Please recognize that what we're doing in this corner of the internet is actually anti-rivalrous. The more we listen to it, the more we engage with it, the more we discuss it, the better it becomes, it improves, and it becomes wealth for our entire community and hopefully humanity as a whole. There's lots to discuss. We've been doing it together. I think we have a much better cognitive network than is functioning in clown world and most of society. I am trying to my best to try to bring us together. And I think there are many good people in our corner who are trying to improve that. I highly recommend considering going to Spotify and subscribing to the Post-Platonic podcast. I ask anybody who has any capacity to host an episode of Post-Platonic to please do so. I tried very hard to make it a format that is limiting enough that it is easy to do and somewhat open source, so that almost anybody should be able to submit episodes. This is not something that one person can do. It has to be a distributed project. And my hope is to find people who I can help contribute to their distributed cognition. I can help improve their capacity to understand things, their capacity to move forward, and in a secure manner that isn't being sabotaged by clown world and postmodernists and Marxists, and that we can arrive at a post-nominalist Neoplatonism that is functional. And that is why I will leave you with my version of the Alcoholic's Prayer, the Serenity Prayer. May the One grant us the strength to change that which we can, the grace to accept that which we cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. There are a few people watching. I will hang around at least for the next 20 minutes if people want to discuss or contribute. If anybody watching who knows me wants to come on the YouTube channel come on StreamYard with me to discuss these things further, to give constructive criticism. I would appreciate it. I appreciate your comments below. Please like, subscribe, and stuff. And yeah, that's about it. I will hang around for a bit.
Hey, Jacob. Can I hear you?
Hey, how you doing?
All right, I can't hear you. Good. I'm doing okay. How are you?
Doing okay. Yeah.
All right. So, you talked about a lot. Like, just to talk about it, you need to talk about economics, which is, in fact, a whole field of study. Uh, Even like talking about Marxism, right? Das Kapital is not a short book. Um, so
And it's a book I don't think anybody should ever read.
really,
There is no reason. Okay, so there's a difference between a fiction book and a nonfiction book, and um, a a nonfiction book that's a work of art. Um,
so I would say that some ideas are so important. Like I don't believe, like I'm not a Muslim, but like reading the Quran doesn't seem like a terrible idea. Um, the it seems like even if you think like Marxism is totally wrong, it seems like just to understand its wrongness, it might be worth reading, right?
well, that's the thing. Okay, so if we are talking about a religious text, fine. If we but hopefully we're talking about economics. And if we're talking about economics, then any ideas in it which are useful, and I mean this is a text from over 100, what, almost 200 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
that that was written by people with a poor understanding of economics and human nature and everything. It's a waste of time. And if you really want to make sure it's a waste of time, I guess you can, but like that's part of a failed distributed cognition, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. So this seems like just by itself could be like a whole video, like what's a waste of time? Why not to read Das Kapital? Could be like a 12-hour video, right?
Well, yeah, I mean distributed cognition, and probably like so. I've been calling these 1, 2. Next one's going to be called 3,
Mhm.
and I'm going to be talking about dialectics. Like, so the first one I was talking about just phenomenology and how we as individuals relate to the world. The
Mhm.
second one, I'm talking about how we relate to each other.
Mhm.
Third one, I'm going to talk about dialectics, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Probably somewhere around 6 or 7. No, probably closer to 9 or 10. I'm going to talk about like groups, right?
Mhm.
In fact, probably at 10, because I'm trying to do this symbolically and post-platonically, and like, you know,
So related to each other, that's a little scary. Like I like economics, I like things, I like markets. These all seem very good to
mm,
me. But these should probably not be the only way we relate to each other. That seems like a bad idea.
that is definitely true, and that's part of what I was talking about. Like the price theory of value is bankrupt. It doesn't work. It
Well,
obviously doesn't work.
it's incomplete, right? Certainly.
Well, I mean, again, all models are wrong. Some are useful, right?
Um, right. So, have you ever heard of Less Wrong? I linked to it a couple times in the channel.
I mean, I've heard the word less wrong, but like,
Okay.
is it?
Well, his idea, one of the reason it's titled this is because of the very idea you were talking about. It's sort of
Mm,
like no model is correct, but some models are more correct than others, right?
right.
Or less wrong.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but like if you go look at Less Wrong, and like this seems just a lot of information that, and you need to sort of onboard people, like even like really smart people, right? Do not know all these things, right? And so the thing that they seemed really good at was like trying to basically onboard everybody into the set of memes that Less Wrong has, and
Mm,
how they did it. And TV Tropes does the same thing, so I know it can work. Is that you've essentially set up a wiki, you set it up into bite-sized pieces of information, and then you backlink to all the, what do you call it? When you have like the syllogism, right? You have like point A and then point B, therefore C, right?
mm,
And so like you can link towards, like you can go back into the syllogism, find out why this is true, or you can link forward and figure out what the implications of this all are. And what this ends up being is you end up going down this weird like wiki rabbit hole, and you can
This
get
is
on board
very, very left
very
brain.
fast. What's that?
This is really, really left brain, and I think it doesn't work.
You don't think?
I think, yeah, I think it's really easy to manipulate as well.
So
and
that's true, right? You could totally get someone and have some. Like TV tropes is mostly a waste of time. Have you been on TV tropes? This is like, this might be like the evil version of this, right? Just waste people's time with like trivia. I
mean, if we're going to have serious distributed cognition, it has to be interpersonal, because it's just too impossible for me to communicate better than the two of us looking at each other talking, and like with one raised eyebrow I can signal to you something incredibly important about what you are saying as you are saying it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Sure.
Yeah, and so to destroy like all of that information by trying to write it down, this is part of what I was trying to get at in my discussion with the meaning code with Karen Wong.
But so how do you see? Because if that's your model, then the only way to onboard people into all these memes is to like make babies, right? And then raise them. Like that seems like the way.
No. So this is why I had my crystallization video, right? So if you are able to create a hierarchy into which people can fit, right? Okay. And you have, and this is part of my whole Project Jethro thing, right? If people can work together, right, in a secure, hopefully, and we can secure this distributed cognitive network, then, and elevate voices. And this is why, like, on my Discord, right, I have a hierarchy and I elevate some voices above others, and other people, like, there's a reason why I insult people and call them stupid on my Discord server. It's not just because it's fun, but also because I want to create a hierarchy of cognition so that people, and that's why I have all the levels, right? There's a reason why Rabbi Joe is on the Elohim level, right? Because he's like, I want his voice to be above everybody else's.
Okay. I'm trying to understand how you get people into the hierarchy, right? So like some hierarchies are just powerful. So like churches are powerful if they're the Catholic Church, especially 500 years ago. I'm like, I understand why people are attracted.
The Catholic Church is still the most powerful, largest organization ever created in human history. Well, there's a billion Catholics.
Like there's the story in the Bible about about the sower, and he sows the seeds, and then the birds come and eat the seeds, and then later on he's like, oh, I'm going to build this great big tree, and the birds are going to nest in the branches. And oh right, my church is going to have a bunch of evil at the people at the top, and that seemed to turn out to be true. And why does that happen? Oh, because powerful things attract evil people who want to be at the top. I understand that that's not a reason to destroy hierarchies. That's not a reason to like do this. But like this almost has a little bit of the self-defeating quality to it.
Look, you're all hierarchies tend toward corruption. That's just part of the failed state of man. But there are better. That's no excuse for not having any hierarchy. And the way you actually create, so the Catholic doctrine of subsidiarity, it's a really important and good way of helping create better hierarchies. There are all kinds of things we can do in order to improve and uncorrupt and these hierarchies. But what, like, we've gotten into a very left brain thing where we find criticisms of things in isolation and then we take them apart, as opposed to recognizing there are trade-offs, recognizing that things have contexts. And so yeah, we need hierarchies. We need strong hierarchies that are based on competence. And unfortunately, we have people who are actually fighting against competence hierarchies.
And see, literally that little dialectic of like, oh right, we need hierarchies, even though hierarchies attract evil. That's a whole book, right? I'm sure there's a book in there, right?
But like, no, see, okay, that's the thing. It's like we have to have enough distributed cognition that you personally don't have to read every book.
Okay. Oh, whoa. You have to like be able to trust people. Oh, that's a hard problem.
Right. Yes, you have to be able to trust people. That is the whole thing with distributed cognition. You have to be able to trust people. And you actually already do. You just don't realize it. Anybody who thinks they think for themselves is an idiot.
It's true that I trust people, but like,
you trust people without even realizing you trust people.
It's true, right? Like there's a highway that goes by my house, right? And those people would come kill me. Like, it wouldn't be that hard, right? But
every time you drive under anything, anytime you enter into a building, you're trusting a lot of people. Yeah. There's a reason why you're willing to walk into buildings.
Yeah, somehow there's enough general goodness in the society. I don't know. You hear the stories about China where like the buildings are all collapsing and stuff, and there's somehow this like destroyed trust that has happened.
So this is what Jordan Peterson talks about. Like, most Americans, most people in the West have it so good. You know, we go and put our water, our glass under the tap, and we drink the water, and we are fine with it. But if you have any neighbors from who immigrated to the United States from a place where the water isn't safe, they all buy water or boil their water. They don't trust the water coming out of the tap. Why should they?
Okay. All right. So there's a lot of memes that need to be put together to be structured in a good way. Not everybody needs to know all the memes, but probably, like, we keep going over these things. So it seems like there's an important subsection of memes that we need the people all over the hierarchy to know something about, right?
So this is the thing. Yeah. You only start questioning things and double checking things if they are either very important or you have reason to distrust. So, for example, when you go to the doctor, right?
Right.
And he gives you a diagnosis, if you actually trust him, no matter how important it is, if you actually trust him, you're not going to spend hours and hours and hours trying to learn. Like, if the doctor tells you have cancer, right? You may spend your time trying to find a better doctor, making sure you have the insurance, whatever. You're not going to second guess the doctor. And this is really what the right brain, this comes down to Ian McGilchrist. You have attention. Did you listen to my video with Karen, the meaning code?
Yes, I did.
That analogy of the animal that's eating and is paying attention to what it's eating, at some point its attention will turn away and it won't be hungry. It won't be thinking about eating. It'll be thinking about running away, or like the lion's roar or whatever, right?
Right.
So you only pay attention to those things which your right brain has decided are worthy of your attention. You only read the books that are interesting, that capture your attention. So far more important than what you're paying attention to is how you decide to pay attention. Which books you decide it's important for you to read.
That is true. That has to be true. I'm not sure how you improve that. That does sound like a hard problem.
So you have to, in fact, be willing to outsource your cognition, and for example, subscribe to somebody's newsletter, right? Mm-hmm. Subscribe to somebody's channels, read that newspaper. So you have to, or go to their church, right? When you do that, you are in fact outsourcing what you pay attention to, right? The pastor in your church, right? If you actually go to church every Sunday and the pastor gives a homily every Sunday, then that pastor is setting the tone for what you're talking about and your life and what's important. That's why, for example, I was thinking so much about this Spotify podcast I have. Comes out every Sunday, right? It's called Post-Platonic. Hint, hint, subscribe, people. And like, so I'm having people guest host, because if I'm hosting, that's something completely different than if there's lots of people who are creating episodes and I'm choosing between episodes, right? Hopefully, one of these days, I will have enough submissions that I will have to choose between two different episodes. And that choice is fundamentally on a higher level of analysis than creating the episodes. And what you have to do is be able to switch level of analysis well and have a good hierarchy. And maybe one day people will decide, you know what? Well, right now I have complete control over the podcast, but I might decide, you know what? This is not something I want to do, and I would hand it off to somebody else. Or I would decide to get several people to help administer it or make those decisions. But the part of the problem here is you have to it's really important to be willing to outsource your cognition in an intelligent and directed manner to people in order to improve it. If you're just following along and other people are distracting you, this is what's going on with our society. Is our somebody, not just somebody, lots of people are hacking our distributed cognitive network. And what we have to do is figure out a way of actually securing our distributed cognition, because we definitely engage in it. There's no question. Everybody who thinks that they're actually deciding for themselves what they do, like, you're not. You just think you are, and that idea itself is, in fact, misinformation, which is keeping you from functioning better.
So that's totally true. Although I thought you believed in free will, so this is a little surprising. But yeah,
I believe free will is a miraculous gift from God.
So, but you don't believe people choose what they do and what they think and what they.
Not completely. It's not binary, right?
Right. You're somewhere on that. What do they call it? Compatibilist spectrum.
I am 100% compatibilist. I have some control over some things, and that itself is a miracle from God.
Okay, I see. So if there was the tiniest pinhole in your ability to control things, that's a miracle, because the world is so much bigger than you. This is something like that.
I mean, look, I was born where I was born. I live where I live. I have the parents that I do. I have the talents and the vices that I do.
Yeah, and it's because of like
Lots and lots of things I have no control over. I have no control over the fact that I have to wear glasses.
Right. So it's not about the memes, it's about the hierarchy. The hierarchy is a better controller of the memes than any wiki I could put together, or even a group of
It's
people.
about trust. We have to be able to trust each other.
And you
We
think
have to be able to trust each other.
And trust comes from good hierarchies. This seems to be
Well, no. Trust allows you to create good hierarchies.
okay.
But trust actually comes from interpersonal relationships.
Okay.
And that's why like I've been focusing so much on interpersonal relationships.
So interpersonal relationships are important. And even like some relationships really guide your ability to trust people, right? There's a lot of talk about how you're raised and how that affects your attachment and all this other stuff. Yeah. But some things are like I do trust the road to basically work and for there to be food at the grocery store. And in some very broad sense, I have a personal relationship with the people at the grocery store, but I don't know any of their names, right? You
extend your trust in many ways that you don't realize yourself. We all do,
right?
And it behooves us. We need to start extending our trust in better ways than just unconscious, not actually realizing why and how we're doing it.
Okay. So conscious attention and conscious trust. And it's not enough for it to be a meme. It has to be a thing you can practice.
Well, I mean, a meme can help spread ideas, and it can help influence people, especially people who aren't paying attention to where they put their trust. And that's why memes are able to get through the distributed cognition better than a lot of other things. The hacked, and they're able to be used to hack our distributed cognition, which is a problem.
Yeah.
But if we actually have real, like, if we have people we trust as public intellectuals and we actually put our trust in them, then we won't have as many problems as we do with people being carried away by memes.
Carried away. So you're talking about something like communism, as far as like
no, not at all. No, I'm just talking about you saying, you know what, I trust Jordan Peterson, and if Jordan Peterson endorses the Daily Wire, I'm going to go ahead and subscribe to the Daily Wire. And if Jordan Peterson, like, it's actually like placing your trust in other people in intelligent and useful ways. It's one of the rules on my server. What did I write? We are all here because we see a lot of not only incompetence but downright corruption. It is eating away at our society. People are justifiably distrustful. I hope it is perfectly clear that I am just as much worried about corrupt and negligent administration of power as everyone else here. But the solution is not to stop trying to find trustworthy people. It is to secure our distributed cognition, to earn each other's trust and extend that trust in competent ways.
Earn each other's trust and extend that trust in competent ways. So yeah, there's like this skill of being able to do that. And in order to have a good network, you actually have to spread that skill around of spreading trust in competent ways and earning each other's trust. And that's part of it too, right? In order for that to spread, people need to be good at earning each other's trust.
Right. I have to be able to know that when you tell me something, right? So one of the things that I always did on social media, and I tried to hopefully be useful in this, was if anything, like if there was some sort of fact claim, like if a meme claimed to be a quote from somebody, I would actually check and make sure that it was a quote from that person. Right? There's that meme that goes around by Voltaire, supposedly by Voltaire, that in order to know who rules over you,
Who you're allowed to make fun of or something like
yeah,
that.
criticize, right?
Criticize.
So, and it's supposedly by Voltaire. It was actually by a pedophile neo-Nazi.
I did not know this. Okay.
Yes, the guy who came up with it is a pedophile neo-Nazi, and I can show you why it's such a horrible meme. What happens to you when you criticize people who are disabled? Everybody gets mad at you.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Hopefully.
we generally really dislike people punching down and criticizing people who are weak, right? And this meme teaches people to assign power to who other people think are weak, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just a complete inversion of a intelligent way of going about doing things, and assigning it to Voltaire makes people who aren't so smart think, oh, so this is an okay rule of thumb for me to live my life by.
Yeah, when it's actually pretty gross.
It's gross and horrible, and there's a reason it comes from a pedophile neo-Nazi.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, like, if in order to be a secure, like, there's a reason why I trust Rabbi Joe and Sam, because when Sam says something, 99.999% of the time it's something that's actually right. And the one time I devastatingly fact checked him, like, he's never going to do that again. He mentioned there's an urban legend about polar bears hunting with their paws over their nose so that the black wouldn't show. And it's just that it's something people say, and it's not actually true. And he actually said that once on one of his videos, and I let him know, and he went and looked, and he's like, oh, I was wrong, I'm sorry. And he's the type of person who's I know that I can trust him to vet information almost usually as well as I can. And so I extend that trust to him and to other people. Like, I try to be very careful about who I extend my cognitive trust to. But anybody who tells, like, who I consider an authority, but anybody who tells you that you should think for yourself, that person is your enemy. All they're trying to do is get you to not trust anyone and pretend like you're not extending your thing.
I can sort of see that. I can see why that might be true. I know there are certainly people who do that, right? I sort of see that in, like, certain kinds of cults and certain kinds of people who want to get you to believe things that are kind of weird. I think I've seen I don't remember his name, but he's one of the creationist guys, and he would make these videos with, like, these terrible arguments. He's the guy with the banana argument. You know what I'm talking about? Who's like, oh man, this is bananas. You don't remember this guy? I don't even want to get into it. I don't want to dunk on creationists today. But I sort of see what you mean. I sort of see that there's definitely people who do that. You were talking about, like, fact checking and, like, trying to find, like, people trying to get into this really scrupulous habit of, like, being trustworthy. That's because I've definitely done that. I've definitely, like, said slightly wrong things. I think it was slightly wrong things I've said today that I'm like, oh man, I should have checked and I was wrong. And I don't know how not to do that, because I'd rather not do that.
Well, I mean, you can also be over scrupulous, right? You can become neurotic and disable yourself by doing that too much. But I mean, it's not too much to ask that, like, when you at least start making sure that you're using reliable sources of information, right? When you get and this is something that intelligent people almost do automatically, but we should all do explicitly by choosing and being critical. Like if I've seen, okay, so for example, the Daily Mail, they usually have most of what they say right, but I don't trust them because I've seen too many articles in there. So if they say something, I will check it to see if it's true, because it might be, but I won't trust them to actually be telling me something true. Whereas I know, for example, the Daily Wire, I have not found they actually do, like, if they make a mistake, they will do corrections and stuff like that. And like, evaluating the credibility of your sources is more important. And that's why, like, that whole discussion on Discord, it was like, it's not just about the stupid question that you're asking now. It's about the fact that you're a person who asks stupid questions.
You're not just a person who's asking a stupid question now, you're a person who asks stupid questions. So you sort of build out that reputation of being the person who asks a stupid question.
Yeah.
So to me, like, a stupid question is like a question that I know you could have looked up like 5 minutes ago and you could have, like, not wasted my time. Is that your idea of what a stupid question is, or is it?
Well, for this particular one, it was like, okay, you're on my server because you've seen my content. I know far more about, like, Judaism and the Bible than 99.9% of the people. When I tell you something, right, about the Bible, if you yourself are, and like, it was during a discussion of the Trinity, and I have told him several times, you know, you need to actually, like, look up the information, see what the counter arguments are. Like, this was at best intellectual laziness.
Yeah, I've seen people, like, sort of try a little harder, but I don't. Making this argument's really hard. It seems like I know, like, if I was going to make a really serious push for this, one of the things I know Thomas Aquinas really wrote about this. I should probably read about him, except I don't really expect to buy it. The arguments I expect to believe, and what I plan on looking into over the next few weeks, is look into Meister Eckhart, because Meister Eckhart seems to make this argument for the Trinity from phenomenology. And this seems like the sort of argument that I might have a chance of believing. But
if you have any questions about the Trinity, I would start with, for example, some debates with Dale Tuggy or on Sam's channel, because his channel is all about the Trinity. If that's actually something you want to go into yourself, like, there are good resources, because this is something that's discussed a lot, and you can take a look at it. But, like, what he was throwing at me, I mean, it's typical sola scriptura Baptist bullshit, which is, oh, well, this translated verse I could never understand in its original language must obviously mean what, like, it's the KJV only, like, a person looking looking in their dictionary and deciding that that helps them understand like theology. It's like it's intellectually lazy and vacuous and bad distributed cognition. Like you're talking to somebody who actually knows biblical Hebrew, and you're going to try to like, and I tried giving him counter verses. Like you saw what, so he quotes. Okay, so let me pull this up. It was in the links thing. So he brings up where was it? He brings up the verse. Where was the verse that he brought? So in response to the verse he brought up, I brought up Matthew 16:18 through 19. But let me find the verse that he, oh, here. So he quotes Matthew 28:18, and Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. And so his argument is, because Jesus said, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth, then Jesus must be claiming that he's God. And my response was, so which part of the Trinity is Peter? Matthew 16:18 through 19, right? And that's, and I say to thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give to thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt bind upon earth, it shall be bound also in heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt loose upon earth, it shall be loosed also in heaven. Now, this is obviously in a Jewish context. It's the exact same thing, the power of heaven and earth. And like, that should give you enough pause to like actually look into the arguments and the commentaries on these verses, right? But he's just being lazy. That's not worth my time.
It does seem like you would like look and be like, hey, is this compelling to like, because there are Unitarian Christians, right? That's the kind of thing I'd be like, okay, like I don't know if there's that many arguments between Christians and like Jewish people, but there's got to be a lot of arguments between like Unitarians and Trinitarians.
There are tons of them, and he didn't look into any of them. He's making some of the worst arguments in the entire, like, I know the good arguments. These aren't even the good arguments. They're not even the okay arguments. And it's all because he's relying on, like, there's this Baptist idea that, like, oh, all I need is my Bible and the Holy Spirit. And it's like, go away. If your entire theological discussion is based on your King James version Bible and the Holy Spirit, you're like a complete waste of time. Yes, I am not a fan of Protestantism.
Okay. I'm just trying to let me think this through. So like the Trinity is not obviously in the Bible. Like you can squint hard enough at certain verses. Those would not be the verses. If you can squint at certain verses, you can sit this sort of thing where Jesus has more than being a human going on. But to actually the Trinity would be like, I don't even know what the Trinity means exactly. Like I'm just sitting here going like, I'm not
okay,
really sure.
So if you want to have this discussion, you're going to do some research, which is not what he was doing.
Because like I know this had to be formed and this had to be argued for, and I know that like Greeks believe in some sort of Trinity, and I know the Greeks can read Greek, so I know that like it's based in like an understanding of the actual language and the actual Bible.
Look, whatever it is,
Yeah.
like arguing with me
Yeah.
about it in the idiotic way that he's doing, it's like, no, you're just being an idiot, and I'm not going to give you the time of day.
Yeah.
And that's why I put him on timeout. Like, spend an hour, go and read enough about the Trinity. Like, spend an hour listening to some debate so that you have some idea how to argue the Trinity. Like, why would I waste my time with this stupidity? And why would I want my server's time, like the people who are reading my server, to
Oh yeah, I get it.
be occupied with this stupidity? Like, you're a bad source of cognition on my server.
Like, for decades, there were whole servers taken up by like the same creation versus evolution argument, and like eventually that ended. But like that was a waste of time. People could have had one of those arguments and been like, "Oh, I guess this is what people believe," and then like not done it for 10 years. And apparently, some people were doing it for 10 years, and it's like we don't need to do that.
Read at the very least, read what's available, and then engage in the garden. Like, if you have a new argument, fine. But if you're reinventing the wheel every time, like, leave me alone. Go away. Don't come on my server with that.
Now, I don't know how, because this is part of it, right? Like, you want people to distribute the information through relationships, but somehow this information has to be good, and in order to be good, people need to get information from outside the relationship, right? They need to get up to speed somehow, and theoretically, you just Google it, but some of this is corrupted, right? Like, we know that there are people who are paid to edit Wikipedia for certain reasons, right?
Okay, so you have to decide what people have expertise in. When I tell you something about Hebrew, right, you might ask Joe if it's right, but like, if you argue with me about what the Hebrew means, like, you're just an idiot. You don't know Hebrew. Like, if I taught you all the Hebrew that you know, there's some level at which, okay, you've independently learned enough that you can, right? But that's a question of not having Dunning-Kruger and actually realizing your capabilities and having intellectual humility and some concept of what your expertise are and where your expertise are not. And yeah, a person who has Dunning-Kruger, huge problem. And I think part of the problem is that we don't, in fact, like, go, you know what, take an IQ test. It's not lying to you. If your IQ is below 100, you should probably like outsource a lot more of your cognition than you are. And 50% of people have an IQ below 100.
I mean, yes, but also, people on the internet, you don't know how old they are. You don't know if they're a bear, right? Like, you really don't know. And so, like,
which is part of the reason why I'm so anti-anonymity.
Yeah, true. Right, and this is why you want people to form relationships. This is important.
And to have like some form of hierarchy, right? Of, okay, these are good information sources. These are people who actually know what they're talking about. These are smart enough people to understand arguments, right? If somebody doesn't understand, like, I see it all the time on YouTube. Like, there are people who are arguments are made to them and they obviously cannot understand them because they're not smart enough to understand them. And it's like, okay, and look, there are times when I can tell that somebody is making an argument that I'm not smart enough to really understand, or I'm not willing to put the brain power to really try to understand it, right? There are definitely people who are a lot smarter than me in our corner of the internet. Like, I think Yosef, I think he's definitely a lot smarter than me. I think Ginger Bill, definitely a lot smarter than me. Certainly, like John Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and Eric Weinstein and Claire Kaw, actually, people who are a lot smarter than me, right? I'm smart enough to understand what they say if I try hard enough, usually.
Mm-hmm.
But like understanding where you are in that hierarchy is far more important than the individual thing. And part of the malware we've gotten into our minds is we should always try to understand things for ourselves instead of actually learning to differentiate between bad sources of cognition and good sources of cognition and using good sources of cognition.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of trust. That's a lot of trust. Trust people to think for you. And we do it like I did not build this building and could not do it. But that's a lot of trust.
You didn't even build your own computer, which might have the camera might be on when you don't know, and somebody might be, you know, and you trusted both the people who make your software and the computer maker, and some people don't. They put a tape over the cameras, you know, which is understandable.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think there's lots of.
Oh, okay, I lost you. I both lost him, and it's getting late, and I kind of want to go. So I'm actually gonna end the stream because it's late. I need to go.